Okay, so France today is where we're going. Rebecca knows lots of French. That's good. Yes, I'm sure that some of you out there have been to France, and I'm sure a lot of you know a bit of French too. Um, Unfortunately, I do not know much French. No. Oh, Ella has an apartment in France. Lovely. Oh, very nice. 2 years of French, Sarah. Oh, that's a lot of French you've been doing. People now are talking to me in French. I wish I understood, but I do not. Oh. um, Today we're going to have a look at France because we're at F in the alphabet, and we're going to go through the same pattern as normal. We're going to have a look at the physical geography, some of the wildlife of France. I've tried to find some of the more interesting wildlife of France this time. We're going to have a look at the government. We're going to have a look at everyone's favorite bit, the economic development. Oh yeah, and the GDP per capita. Yes. And then we're going to finish off with some culture. Really, the whole thing's an excuse to get to my favorite bit of French culture. Okay, but we'll get there at the end. See if you can guess what it is. All right. So here's our world map, and as we can see, France is quite a sizable country in Europe. Our ready coloured countries here are Europe, and France is there. A very close neighbour to us, not the closest, that's Ireland, but a very close neighbour to the UK, if you are in the UK right now. And it's a country with a long history. It's one of those very old countries. There are new countries on this planet, like South Sudan, pretty new. But then there are very, very old countries, and France is certainly very old. If you've been watching the Monday lessons with the modern history, you'll have noticed that all of the medieval kings that we've been talking about have spoken French, and their family lines can be linked back to France. So we can see that there's a big link between Britain and France. And now, thankfully, after centuries of fighting, we're pretty good allies too. There you go. Yes, just across the English Channel, Grace. Yes, exactly. There you go. So there's a little stretch of water that separates us from France, which is why I'm assuming a lot of you have been there, because it's, if you are going to go on holiday, it's a relatively easy place to get to. A bit easier than America, Australia, or China. Yeah. Okay. Now, we've got our flag of France here, the tricolore, which means three-coloured. There you go. The blue, white, and red. Lots of red, white, and blue around, isn't there, in flags? But that's our French flag. And we'll pop straight up and we'll start having a look. We'll avoid the culture for a minute. We'll come back to that later. But we'll go for the physical geography first. So, ooh. Rock went to France in a tent and it rained every day. Oh dear. There you go. So here's France on the map here. Let's see if we can zoom in a little bit here. This one shows us nicely its neighbours. So it borders Spain in the south. We've got Italy, Switzerland, Germany over to the east. We've got little old Luxembourg to the north and Belgium. And then, of course, we've got Britain just over the channel. So it's a country that's always had to deal with lots of neighbours, some of them fine and friendly, some of them not so much. We also have islands off the end here. Here's Corsica, which is part of France too. And for much of its history, France had quite a large empire. So it could count huge swathes of America and Canada and North Africa and the Caribbean and, well, you name it. Loads of countries once were part of the French Empire. But now France, as a country, is relatively small. It's a similar story to Britain, of course. For those wondering what's behind me, today I'm in front of the tallest point in France, Mont Blanc, which is this huge towering mountain. I like this picture because the mountain is reflected behind me in the lake as well. I like it. How do you spell the French flag? I don't know. Tricolore. Tri. It definitely starts like that. Now, if we have a look at the relief map of France, let's zoom in a little bit more in here, we can see that the north of France is pretty low. Just a reminder for those of you who maybe you haven't seen this before, but our relief maps, they show us how high the land is, how high the ground is. The greener it is, the lower it is. So we usually see that around the edges of country as it comes down to sea level. The darker a color, in this case, the more yellow into brown into almost black, that's how high it is. So yes, we've got some big mountain ranges here. We've got the Alps, which border Italy, and we've got the Pyrenees, which border Spain. We also have this big bit in the middle called the Massif Central, which just means, well, the massive middle bit, which is an interesting name. I don't know, the fat middle, maybe we could call it, the Massif Central. It's called that because it's really, really big and it's in the middle, so kind of makes sense. Yeah. Kyle's saying he's been to Montpellier. Ooh, lovely. I don't know where that is. Sounds good though. Sounds very French, doesn't it? Now, if we take this further and we compare our relief map here to our average temperature. Now, this map here, this very, very colourful one, it shows us the average temperatures of different parts of France. Now, the greener it is, the colder it is. So we'll see that that generally matches up with our highland. Yeah. So here we've got the Massif Central. You can see that it gets colder as it goes up because it gets higher altitudes. That makes sense. We've also got some other cooler areas here going around the edges of France. Now it tends to get warmer towards the south, as you'd expect. Here's the Pyrenees. Yes, they're high, but they're also bordering Spain, so it's getting very warm down here. Now, the hottest part is the south coast down here. This is the Mediterranean Sea right here. We can see it in this here on the map. It's Mediterranean. And there it's really, really warm. I've been down to the Mediterranean part of France for a holiday, and it was very nice and warm. Very good. You know, the sea is nice and warm. It's very similar to being in Spain or Portugal, or at least the south coast of Portugal, or over into Italy. Yeah. So there's quite a big difference between the temperatures we can see here. The north, our yellow area here, that's pretty much what we might be used to in southern Britain. So it's a similar kind of temperature that we're used to, but it definitely gets much warmer towards the south when it gets really quite balmy. Very, very nice. Let's check the chat. What is the red dot? Oh, what, this red dot down here? This would be the island of Corsica down here. So you can see that that's pretty warm too, because that's even further south, and that's ringed by the Mediterranean. The tallest mountain in France is Mont Blanc, which is behind me here. I'll write that on the screen. Hang on. If I can find, where did I put my pen? So we've got, ooh, that's a funny one. Mont Blanc. There we are. White mountain, it means, because it's a mountain and it's white. It's kind of like the same naming convention as the Massif Central, There it is. It's a great big mountain and it's white. We will call it White Mountain. Yeah. No messing about. Where is Paris? That's a good question. For that, we'll have to go back to this one to show you. But Paris, the capital of France, is up here in the north. So right there is Paris, our big star, which means that it's pretty easy to get from London to Paris because there's a great big train line, of course, the Eurostar, which will take you all the way from one city to the other through the Channel Tunnel, which is here. A great big tunnel under the earth, which can take trains and cars and all sorts right through to France. So it's much easier to get there nowadays than it was, I don't know, when was the Channel Tunnel built? A while ago. I can remember it being built. I was a child, a tiny child with hair. Can you believe it? When the Channel Tunnel was built. I believe it was the late 90s they must have finished that. Alex been to Disneyland. Yes, there's Disneyland Paris, isn't there? Which is somewhere quite close to Paris. I've been there too. It was very good. Very good indeed. Yes, Rowan, believe it or not, I used to have hair. Grace is saying 1994. Cool. Okay, I'll go with that. All right. Sounds about right. I was alive then. See what? Rock's been to Troyes. That's nice. Okay. And Rowan's never been to France. That's okay. Okay. So, so we've got a bit of a difference in climate here. It's a varied country because it's a bit larger than the UK. And that Mediterranean coast is definitely the warmest. Now, let's go and have a look at some of the creatures we'd find. Because there's a wide range of different climates and temperatures, you've also got quite a nice range of wildlife as well. So I've tried to select some animals from the different areas here. But we're going to start off with the Gaelic rooster. This is the national animal of France, or as I like to call it, the chicken of France. Now, the chicken of France, you can see on lots of French stuff. If we remember, different countries have their national animals. Now, I'm not going to criticize the French here, okay? I mean, chickens are lovely animals, but just to remind you of some of the other national animals we've seen, England, Ethiopia, they have lions, yeah? Scotland has a unicorn. Wales has a dragon. There's loads of country with wolves. Spain has a bull. France has a chicken. I'm sure it's a fine chicken. But I don't know. I can't see it winning in a fight against a lion, if you ask me, though. There you go. I'm sure there's some deep symbolism behind the chicken that I just do not understand. So let's see what other animals we would find. Of course, we would find chickens in France for sure. Here, I've tried to pick some of the more exotic-y animals that you find in France, and the first one here is the mouflon. I don't know if you pronounce it like that, but I'm going to. I'm sorry, Josh. I should not insult the chicken. I know. I will respect the chicken. Ella asks what England's animal is the lion. Scotland is the unicorn, and Wales is the dragon. So those are the British ones. Northern Ireland doesn't get its own animal, unfortunately. Yeah. French nature loves chickens. Yes, there you go. Oh, I did not know there was a tunnel going through Mont Blanc. That's very cool. Yes, I suppose that makes it much easier than having to walk over it. That would make sense. Okay. So our mouflon is quite a rare kind of goat species, or sheep species, I think, technically, that you find in France. They're quite rare nowadays. They've been hunted a lot, so they're on the edge of extinction in France. You can find them in other countries in the world in bigger numbers, but you find them usually in the high ground towards the south and around the Massif Central. Now, I forgot something about the Massif Central. We'll come back to that in a minute. Here we've got a rather cute beastie called a marmot. These live in France too. Not in massive numbers again. These are relatively rare. You wouldn't find them in Paris, I don't think. But they do roam around. They are super cute. These are little creatures that spend most of their time underground, so they're pretty hard to find. I did read somewhere that they only pop up out of the ground on average twice a day to eat, and then they go back under into their burrows. I don't know what you call a marmot hole. And they hibernate during winter. So this one is looking quite plump. I reckon it's ready to go and hibernate. This one, it's very, very cute. Related to the squirrel, apparently. Now here we've got a super cute lynx. Now lynx are things that we can find in Britain. They're very rare. If you go up into Scotland, there's still some wild lynx, and all over Scandinavia you'll find them. But you can still find them, especially in the high places of France. And this is like a very cute one, isn't it? I mean, look at his little lynxy face and his little lynxy fur. It's so cute. Oh, I could just snuggle it. Yeah, I like lynxes too, Jay. I do. Yeah. No, you don't want to keep it. Oh, Armani's saying she wants to keep the lynx. I don't think so. I think it might be a bit vicious. Yes, lynxes are wild cats who are very good at hunting, very fast. I don't think they're the kind of cat you'd want in your house. Might get scratched. Now, in recent years, there's been the reintroduction of wolves into France. And I believe at this point, you can only find them in the French Alps. So right there to the east, bordering Italy, you can find wild wolves roaming around, which is why these are in the snow. So they're not roaming all over France. At some point they would have done, but not anymore. But they are coming back, and the numbers are growing, so that's really good news for the wolves. Maybe in 50 years' time, you'll find wolves all over the place. We're also reintroducing wolves into Britain too, so there are wolves in Britain now. I personally am a big fan of wolves. I know some people don't like them. They get a bit scared of wolves, but I like them. Yes, now I did see someone's here saying, Le Sur, I can't even read it, it's gone by too quick. Someone's saying here that there were bears that there are now bears in France. I did see something about how bears are being reintroduced too, brown bears. So that'd be quite cool. I'd like to go and see bears. Something else that's in the woods and forests of France are wild boar. Cute little baby ones here. They're so cute. Wild boar are found all over Europe pretty much. Again, these are things which now live in England but didn't for a while. We did make them extinct, but now they are back. So you can find them all across Europe now, and I think their numbers are growing in France too, partly because people like to eat them. Yeah, so people like to have them in the wild so they can go and hunt them and eat them, make them into nice wild boar sausages. Nom, nom, nom. Um, this is cool. Amelia and Benjamin are telling me that in the lockdown there are wild boar roaming the streets of Paris. A very cultured wild boar. Yes, I will have a bottle of champagne, please, and a sandwich made with French bread and brie. Oui, oui. Maybe that's how they talk. I doubt it. So let's have a look over here. Now, if we go further south, we can find lots of nice reptiles. This is a lovely green lizard from down near the Mediterranean coast. You can find them there in the rocks, and because they like the warm temperatures. There's also species of snake, of course, and things like that. There's cougars in America. Yes, for sure there is. Yeah. Yes, Shadow Henchman. We will come to food later, yes. Now, I did forget to show you one thing when we went to the physical, so I'm just going to pop back down here a second. But when I was mentioning the Massive Central, I forgot to mention that the landscape is quite spectacular. You can see the shape here of a lot of the hills and mountains in the Massive Central. They're formed out of very old, very extinct volcanoes. So you've got this huge line of hills and mountains, which, well, they're volcano shaped. You know, this would have been here. This would have been the hole where the where the magma rose and the lava spilled out. And you can see another one over here in the distance. This huge line of volcanoes which have been extinct for millions of years. So it makes a wonderful landscape, quite an interesting landscape for sure. Not active volcanoes anymore. Now, Grace asks, are there any active volcanoes in France? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there are or not. I mean, there's plenty in Italy, which is very close. As far as I'm aware, there's not, but you might well prove me wrong. I don't know. I mean, there could well be one on Corsica, I guess. No, I'm not sure. They're certainly not far from volcanoes, if there are none itself. Oh, here we go. But yeah, that might be a good thing to research. Are there volcanoes in France? Now then, let's come up here and have a look at the government. Here we go. Here, now, France, like many countries, has a president. The current president is Emmanuel Macron. Yes, we'll have to talk about the food, won't we? France, like many countries, has a president who is, the most important person in the country. France is a democracy, which means that the people there, they vote on who should be their leaders. And I can't remember exactly when, but Emmanuel Macron was voted in a few years ago under a huge wave of popular support. He was kind of a surprise because he came from nowhere. Usually in elections, people vote for people that have been around for a while, who have a lot of experience. Emmanuel Macron, he kind of started off pretty small, and within a year, he built up a huge following, and he got massive votes, and he ended up becoming the president in quite a shock election, quite an exciting election it was. I think it must have been 2017 or something. Now, there's a big question. Le Sur Français asked me, how did France become a republic? What a good question. We might come to that in a second. Now, France also has a prime minister. So if you think about England, we've got the Queen and we've got the prime minister. France, we can kind of say it's a bit similar. You've got the president and the prime minister. The president is the guy who makes the big decisions and sort of is the public face and goes to all the big meetings and stuff. Whereas Edouard Philippe here, I'm not sure if that's how you say his name, Philippe maybe? We'll call him Ed. Ed here, the prime minister, he's kind of in the background a bit more. He's still an incredibly important person, but he does a lot of working out the fine details of the laws and worrying about the money and all that kind of stuff, the stuff that maybe isn't quite so exciting but is still really important. Now, there's no royal family in France because they all had their heads chopped off back in the late 18th century. when the French had a revolution. Vive la revolution! And they decided that actually they didn't want a royal family anymore. They chopped off the head of Marie Antoinette and King Louis, and they declared that the people would rule. It all went a bit out of hand, though, I must say. Felipe, thank you, Grace. It all got out of hand, the revolution. The people took power, but they couldn't quite stop chopping people's heads off. A man called Robespierre, he came to the fore, and he started chopping off all the heads of all the rich people, which everyone was like, well, hey, this is great. But then he started chopping off the heads of the poor people that looked at him funny, and everyone was like, no, this is going too far. And then he just kept on going until finally he was grabbed and somebody chopped his head off. Ugh, lots of heads being chopped off. Now, out of all that chaos comes a man from Corsica, a man who isn't particularly rich, isn't particularly poor, but my goodness, does he know how to use a cannon? Oh yes, his name, Napoleon Bonaparte. Italian, mainly, because of course down on Corsica there's a good mix of French and Italian. So he goes down in history as probably the most, or at least the most recent history, the most important person in France, a beloved hero of France and conqueror of most of Europe. I've picked two pictures here of Napoleon which kind of show his character, his dark, brooding character, and his heroic, horse-ridey, point-up-in-the-air character, if that's a thing. Can I write his name down? Yes, let me see. Let me make sure that I spell it right. My spelling's not so good. Here we go. Now, we call him Napoleon Bonaparte, but really his name should be Napoleon Bonaparte. His brothers were Giovanni and Luigi. You know, you can't get much more Italian than that, can you? But he went to school in France, he learnt how to shoot cannons, and during the chaos of the revolution, he built up support and power, and he ended up taking control. So the country went from a country that was ruled by the people to a country that was ruled by an emperor. There we are, Napoleon Bonaparte. And we fought, Britain fought, quite a large war against Napoleon. We fought him all over the place. We fought him in India, we fought him in Egypt, we fought him in the sea at Trafalgar. And we ended up, with the help of some friends, especially the Russians, we ended up defeating Napoleon. But if we go back just over 200 years to 1812, this is what Europe would have looked like then. Let me just put his name back on the screen because I took that off very quickly, didn't I? Here we are. Ooh, here we go. So this is what Europe would have looked like at the height of Napoleon's empire. He, of course, controls France because that is his country, with Corsica, that's his home, that's where his family lives. He also took over all of Italy and most of Germany. He allied himself with the Austrian Empire and took over the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, so most of Poland right there. He also made friends with Norway and Denmark. And he would have gone much further too if it wasn't for those pesky British who landed in Portugal and pushed all the way back through Spain up to France. And at the same time, the Russians pushed all the way from the east, and we caught Napoleon in a great big sandwich, and we sent him away to the island of Elba and told him not to be so naughty. Bad Napoleon, stop it. Unfortunately for Britain and the rest of Europe, Napoleon is not going to be stopped by being put on an island. Oh no. He escapes from Elba. Hurrah! And he comes back to France and he makes another empire. But Britain isn't going to have this either. So we send down the Duke of Wellington, he of the very watertight boots. And he comes down and he defeats Napoleon, with some help from some friends, at Waterloo. Waterloo. And then we decide we're not going to let him get away with this trick again. So instead of putting him on the island of Elba, we take him to another island. Haha! An island right in the middle of the Atlantic. A tropical island where he sits and moans for the rest of his days. Poor Napoleon. Oh. But But now his body has been taken home. A few years later, they were allowed to take it back and put it into a coffin in Paris. And there's a grand building in Paris for his tomb. There you go. So Napoleon used to rule France as an empire. After that, it became a proper republic and a proper democracy. And so now there are no kings, there are no queens, there are no emperors. Instead, there's a prime minister and a president. Now, I'm not criticizing these guys, but they're not as cool as Napoleon. I'm just saying, okay, that's my opinion. I'm sticking with it. How tall was he? Now, there is a bit of a myth that Napoleon was short. He wasn't really short. He was probably about my height, which isn't massively tall. But for back then, 200 years ago, most people didn't really reach 6 foot. That was pretty rare. So he would have been, at least a little bit above average. The myth that he's small kind of comes from the British. We tried to make fun of him a lot, and we called him little to make him feel bad. Aww. Also, there's a bit of complication because somebody wrote down Napoleon's height in French meters, which is slightly, or were back then. French meters were different size to the English meters. So when the English heard that he was however many meters tall, they said, well, that's very short, but only short because, well, French meters are bigger than English meters. So you see, it was a bit of a misunderstanding. He wasn't actually that short at all. Quite an average sized guy. There you go. A question there, how high is Mont Blanc? Let's have a look. I'll see if I can find out for you. Here we go. Mont Blanc is, oh, can I find it? How do I find it? Here we go. Oh, it's giving me watch brands. That doesn't help me, does it? Here we go. It is 4,808 meters above sea level, which is pretty tall. That's taller than a giraffe stood on the back of another giraffe stood on the back of an elephant. And that's tall. So this is really tall. Very, very tall mountain. Okay. Let's take a look over here at the economy of France, everyone's favorite bits. Oh, yes. We're getting quite a few countries on here now. Now we're gone to F. We've got a lot of countries to compare. Still at the top of our table here is Denmark. France is not as well off as the people of Denmark, with Australia just behind. Down the bottom, unfortunately, is last week's country, Ethiopia. Oh, they're very poor. They're right down the bottom there. Brazil and China doing a commendable job coming up there. But France is pretty similar to United Kingdom. Very, very, very similar. To give you the exact numbers, here we are. This is our GDP per capita. Now, for those of you who aren't sure what I mean when I say GDP per capita, remember, we've got to imagine taking all the money that everyone makes in a country every year, and we put it into a great big pot, and then we divide that pot up amongst the amount of people in the country. Babies, old people and all. Everyone gets an equal share. And if we were to do that in France, every human being in France would get 41,463 US dollars. Ooh, that's a lot of dollars. Slightly less than if we did the same in the UK, though. The UK is 42,920 US dollars. So UK is a little bit richer than France by this metric anyway. So there you go. Oh, why does it say 2017? Because that's where I've got my data from. Yeah, so that's the latest data I've got there. So I've compared all the countries from 2017. Is the idea. Yeah, good question, Oblar. Okay, so yeah, a fairly rich country, not the richest, but doing pretty well. Right, now we get to go and look at the culture. Oh yes, oh yes. So there goes the chicken of France. Back down past the maps. Hello, hello. And let's start with the most obvious part of French culture, some of the architecture. Now, this building, I am sure, needs no introduction, but I'm going to give it one anyway. This is the Eiffel Tower. Used to be, at one point, the tallest structure on Earth. Not anymore. Been beaten by quite a lot. But it stands in Paris, and it is this huge, probably the most noticeable, most well-known landmark on Earth, I'm going to say. Possibly, maybe we could maybe say the Great Pyramid or the Statue of Liberty. It's in that kind of ballpark, you know. Lots of people have, you know, if you see a picture of the Eiffel Tower, you pretty much know where it is. Yeah. Um, oh, there you are. Le Sieur Francais was born in France and then moved to England when they were tiny. Ah, and Shadow Henchman has been to the Eiffel Tower. Yes, I'm sure a lot of you have been to the Eiffel Tower. I've been up the Eiffel Tower. It's a very nice place to go, and you get a great view of the city of Paris from the top. Oh, how tall is it, Asma? I'll have a look. Let me find out. Okay. Let's see. What is the height of the Eiffel Tower? It is. Let's see. Ooh, how tall are you tower? Now, it is 276 meters. That's the highest point you can stand. I believe that the actual point goes higher than that, though. So 125 meters seems to be. No. It was the first structure to reach 300 meters. So yeah, I think it's 300 meters, maybe a little bit higher. So that's pretty big. Yeah. Ah, Le Sieur Francais, you walked to the top of the Eiffel Tower. I did that too when I was younger. And my friends, well, it got ugly at the top of the Eiffel Tower, I must say. I was young, I was foolish. My friends were young and foolish too. Oh, 324 meters to the tip. Thank you very much, Bilal. And my friends, they wrestled me to the ground on that high building. They took off my socks and they threw them off the top. My socks, I had to watch as they fell across Paris. Oh, I just hope they didn't hurt anyone that day. I had to walk down with bare feet. There you go. It's a wonderful building, though. Yeah, great views from the top. Now, another really important building that you'd find in Paris is Notre Dame Cathedral, which some of you may have heard of a while ago. Was it last year or the year before? Time moves so strangely when you're old. This is a cathedral, probably the grandest medieval cathedral in France, if not in Europe. Home, of course, to a famous hunchback called Quasimodo, if you believe the stories. There you go. Why is it on fire? Yes, it caught fire, I think it was last year, although, as I say, my time has gone all wrong in my head. It burnt down. I think an electrical fire got started in there by accident, and it burnt. They are restoring it. They're trying to rebuild it. But yeah, it was a great tragedy, especially to the people of Paris and people who hold Notre Dame Cathedral as an important site. Now, Notre Dame Cathedral tells us a lot about the religion of France too, of course, because it's a cathedral, and it's a Roman Catholic cathedral, which tells us that the biggest religion in France is Roman Catholicism, which is a type of Christianity. In Britain, just to compare, our main religion is Protestant Christianity. So it's the same general religion, but a different flavor of it, if you like. Oh, yes, let me write up Notre Dame. Let me see, can I remember how to spell that? I believe it's Notre Dame, as the Americans might say. I think that's how you spell it anyway. I'm going for it. So yeah, Roman Catholics in France compared to Protestants in Britain. Of course, in France, though, because of La Révolution, religion was taken out of any kind of leadership role in the country. So France was one of the first countries to have the true freedom of religion, to say you can be whatever religion you want. So France has a huge Muslim population, a rather huge Protestant population, plus Jewish people, Buddhists, Hindus, you name it. It's a great big boiling, mixing pot of loads of different religions and culture. But the traditional main religion is still Roman Catholicism. Grace asks, are my socks still there? I imagine so. I like to think maybe they fell on top of a patisserie, and there they stayed to this day, imbued with the wonderful smells of baking pastries. I don't know. Yes, of course, Kyle, not everyone has a religion in France. Many people have no religion at all, yes, which is fine too. So yes, there's Notre Dame. They will fix it, I'm sure. Now, another important landmark in Paris in particular is the Louvre Museum. And this is a museum and art gallery that holds a lot of very important treasures that France has collected over the years. And it's very noticeable from this really modern glass pyramids that are outside of it. Um, how long does it take to build? I don't know. Um, I'm not sure how long any of these buildings took to build. I imagine the quickest was the Eiffel Tower. Uh, Notre Dame was built in, I probably read the 12th century, something like that, maybe a bit earlier. Notre Dame has a bit of a place in English history as well, because it's the only church where an English king has been crowned King of France. Henry VI was crowned King of France when he but a baby in Notre Dame. So we've got a French king that had his coronation there. But no, I'm not sure how long it took to build. That's a good question, though. Are these pyramids optical illusions? No, they are. Well, they're glass pyramids, but you can see they're surrounded by water, so you get the reflections, and they're illuminated from inside. So yeah, pretty cool things. Here we go. Oh, is it the home of the Mona Lisa? That's a good question. I think you might be right. I think Mona Lisa is certainly in France somewhere. It could well be. Let's have a little check for that. Where is the Mona Lisa? Let's have a look. Yes, it is at the Louvre. There you go. And Fire Tablet saw the Mona Lisa. That's pretty cool. I hear it's quite small, but I would like to see it live. I've been to Paris a couple of times, but I've never been to the Louvre. So there you go. But yes, she is in there, hanging around like she does, smiling, her little smile. Interesting. They've also got, for those who a bit of a shout back to ancient history, they've also got a Lamassu or two as well. Proper old ancient Babylonian Lamassu. So that's pretty cool. The building is called the Louvre. I'll put that spelling up as well. I'm not sure if it's pronounced the Louvre or the Louvre. As you probably noticed, French is not my my forte, which is ironic, of course. Oh, hang on. Okay, I managed to put in a link, but there's our Louvre. There you are. Louvre. That's how you spell Louvre. Okay. Now, we'll go on to a bit of other culture. Of course, France is famous for being cultured. So we'll have a look at some of the things that are very particularly French. The first being champagne, which is a drink, of course, which you lot shouldn't be drinking, but it is a very famous type of alcohol, a fizzy, bubbly wine. Now, champagne and France is famous for its wine of all different varieties, because grapes grow very nicely in France. It's a bit warmer than Britain, especially down towards the south here. But the way that drinks get their name, if you've ever wondered why champagne is called champagne, or cognac is called cognac, it's because they all come from different parts of France, and depending on where the wines are where the grapes are grown, and where they are made into wine, they can get different names. So champagne comes from this region up here. This is where champagne comes from. Now, if you try and make a bottle of champagne over here, or heaven forbid, in England, then it doesn't count as champagne. It's actually against the law to call it champagne. And these other areas, they all have their own kind of wines as well, which have to be made in that specific place. You cannot just decide to make some fizzy wine and call it champagne. It has to come from those precise places. In fact, at the moment, the French government are talking about making the area that is officially Champagne a bit bigger, which some people are very, very keen on, because if you own a field of grapes a vineyard, they call it. If you own a vineyard right next to Champagne, so let's say there's your field, and then there's a hedge, and then there's Champagne, the people on that side of the hedge over in Champagne, their grapes will be worth millions of euros. Yeah, their fields will be worth millions of euros because they can make proper champagne. Whereas you, on the other side of the hedge, you can only make a few thousand because it's not real champagne, because you're the wrong side of the hedge. So there's a lot of people who are encouraging the French government to make the area of Champagne bigger, and then suddenly all those other grape farmers, they'll be able to have their land that costs millions of euros too. It does, Grace. It looks a bit like lemonade, doesn't it? Yes. Um, I'm not a fan of champagne. I'm far too uncultured. Yes. Uh, I'm more of a cider drinker than a champagne drinker. It doesn't really agree with me. Too bubbly. Yeah. So that's probably wine in general, but champagne in particular are probably uh, the most famous drinks from France. And of course, we couldn't talk about French food without talking about the cheese and the bread, my two favorite bits of French food. Loads of different cheeses come from France, loads of different uh, cheeses, ew, people are saying. Um, yeah, that's okay. Yeah. Lots of people do like champagne. I'm not criticizing anyone who doesn't. It's just not my particular taste, that's all. Oh, Grace used to drink, dip her finger in her dad's cider and lick it. Oh, very naughty. So loads of different varieties, from really strong blue cheeses to these ones here, which are quite relatively mild. We can see the blue veins running through this particular piece of cheese. I'm not much of a cheese expert, so I couldn't tell you what all these different cheeses are, except they're all cheesy. And of course, France is also famous for its breads, the baguette, of course. Um, we could also add to this list some of the more unusual French foods that you might have heard of, like uh, frog's legs and snails, escargot. I don't think, in truth, they are eaten in particularly wide circles, but they are eaten in France. Yeah, so snails are escargot. Also, horse is a much more commonly eaten meat in France than it is in Britain. In Britain, people really don't eat horse. It's like there's something that we have against it. I'm not quite sure what. But in France, horse will be eaten far more commonly. So there you go. Different countries, different customs, different food. That's a good question, Lewis. Why do they eat moldy cheese? So depending on how you've made the mold happen, it can make the flavor really, really strong. So I've got a friend who lives in France, and he visited me recently, and he brought with him some French cheese, put it in my fridge. My fridge stank. In fact, my entire kitchen stank. In fact, my entire house stank for the entirety of his visit, just from this one piece of cheese sat in my fridge. Oh, really strong it was. Oh no, Gemma can't have bread or cheese. That's annoying. You'll just have to stick to the champagne then, I guess, or the snails, of course. That sounds cool. Frozen snails. I like the sound of that. So yeah, France is very proud, and quite rightfully so, of its food culture. Some of the best chefs, some of the best restaurants come from France. So there we go. Now we're nearly at my favourite bit of culture. We haven't got there yet, but we're getting there. Oh look, it's the chicken of France again. Big up the chicken of France. Now, I don't know much about sport. What I do know, though, is that the French football team is pretty good. They have a chicken on them, which probably makes them play well. If I had a chicken on me, I'd play football well. And they won something called the 2018 World Cup or something, which means apparently that they're pretty good. And here is that team of 2018. I'm sure some of you out there, you know your football, and you could probably name some of these guys. I'm just going to call them French football 1 to 11. I don't know. They do have names. I just don't know them. All hail the chicken of France. Yes. So yeah, a very fine footballing nation. In fact, I seem to remember that the World Cup was held in France at some point. It might even have been 2018. I just don't pay attention. I'm sorry. Oh, there we go. Someone saying that the goalie is called Allison. Are you sure? Seems strange. What did they do with the chicken? They wear it on their chests. If we have a look here, I mean, here we are. Look, chicken, chicken, chicken. In England, of course, we have 3 lions, but obviously that does not help you play football. We're not so good at football. What you need is a chicken. Okay, so maybe maybe the French chicken wouldn't win in a fight, but maybe the French chicken would win in a football match against 3 lions. There you go. Now, my favourite bit of French culture. Yes, I've tried to sort of get through this as quickly as possible because, to be honest with you, I do like French food, and I respect the French football team. I even quite like the chicken of France, but there's one thing that the French have given to existence, which is truly beautiful and wonderful. And I could have talked about cinema, film noir. I could have talked about literature, I suppose, or even theatre, but no, the best thing, in my opinion, that the French have ever done is their philosophy. They're philosophers. Such minds, such grace, such flair, such interesting ideas. And so what I've done is I've picked a few of my favorite French philosophers that I can now wax lyrical about for the last 10 minutes. Hooray. Oh, what is that? That's a good question. So a philosopher, for those of you who aren't sure, philosophy is my real passion, philosophy and religion. I like geography, but really it's all about the thinkings. So philosophy is the love of wisdom. It's people who think deeply about, well, all kinds of things. The big questions. Is there a God? Why is there a chicken over there? That kind of thing. The big questions. And France has had more than its fair share of incredible thinkers. So I've brought up some rather modern philosophers here. And these three, two in particular, are from the existentialist school of philosophy, which means these are guys who spent a lot of time. They are smoking rock, and I purposefully picked pictures of these guys with cigarettes, partly because you can't really avoid it, because they very rarely put their cigarettes down. That's part of being a French philosopher in the 1960s, I'm afraid. And also, it kind of encapsulates the whole theme of existentialism, because how do I explain this? Smoking cigarettes wouldn't seem like such a bad idea if you were an existentialist, as long as you truly meant it. I'll try and unpack that in a second. But no, I wouldn't suggest smoking cigarettes to you out there. Try not to be like a French philosopher. They're all dead, and it's not a coincidence. Okay, so the existentialists were a group of thinkers who thought very deeply about what it was to be a human. Should we believe in a God? Is there a point? Should we be here? In fact, our three philosophers here, we've got Jean-Paul Sartre, who is probably the father of modern existentialism. He would sit with his cigarettes outside of cafes in Paris, smoking all day and thinking, I think and I smoke and I smoke and I think, and then I drink coffee and then I smoke and I think and I think and I smoke. And then he would write books as well, of course. He wasn't completely lazy. But he came up with ideas, the basic idea that there's no need for religion. God doesn't exist. Instead, what exists is us, and we should make the best out of our lives. We shouldn't pigeonhole ourselves. He talks about a waiter. He's there, he's in his cafe, smoking his cigarettes, thinking, and he sees the waiter across the way, and the waiter is being really enthusiastic and very polite and very helpful, but Sartre looks at him and thinks, no, you should not be being a waiter. It's all fine and well and good to be a waiter, but what you shouldn't be doing is in identifying your entire life as a waiter, for you are more than a waiter. People can be what they want to be. Don't just wait on people. Be your own person. Go, sing, dance, own a chicken farm. There you go. Now, Albert Camus, he was a bit of a grumpy fellow, a grumpy philosopher. He would roam around, and his big question in life was, why? Why even live? Oh, what is the point in being alive? And he would sit there and he would argue with Sartre about this and that, smoking his cigarettes outside of his Paris restaurants and cafes. Very miserable. He wrote some very interesting books, which when you're a bit older you should read. But his general answer was that actually it's probably quite good to be alive. It's probably quite a lot of fun. So we should be alive, but we should do it properly. Stop walking around trying to please everyone else and be your own self. Yes. I'm going blue. I am going a bit blue, aren't I? It must be something to do with the lighting, I reckon. It's a bit of a grey day out here. I'm used to a nice sunny day with lots of good lighting. If I move that way, I seem to stop being blue, don't I? This is true. Now, in the middle of these three here, we have Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir, she believed quite shocking things for her time. She believed that women were the same as men. Dun, dun, dun. And that women and men should be equal. She is a feminist philosopher who believed that women were strong and powerful and should be given the same rights and freedoms as the men around her, including her boyfriend, Jean-Paul Sartre, who she never married because she said she would be owned by no man. Quite right too. So those are some of our modern French philosophers, interesting guys. But if we go back in time, we can find some other incredible philosophers in France. Now, René Descartes here, he of the wonderful poofy hair and moustache. This guy, you might have heard of one of his sayings, cogito ergo sum, which means I think, therefore I am. Now, Descartes had a problem. Descartes didn't know how to trust anything. He didn't know if anything was real. He does look a bit like he's from Harry Potter, doesn't he, Grace? Yes, he looks a bit like Snape. He would definitely be in Slytherin, I reckon. But he had a problem. He couldn't tell if anything was real or not. He couldn't tell if the things that he saw out the window were real. He couldn't tell whether the sun was real or America was real because he'd never been there. He couldn't tell whether the grass was real or the rain was real or even himself was real. And so he retreated into his own mind. And he came up with this idea that, well, he must be real because otherwise he wouldn't be able to think that he wasn't real. Yes? Hence, I think, therefore I am. The only thing that must be real is his brain. But then he came to another problem. Hang on, maybe my brain is not real. Maybe my brain is just a trick that is being created by the devil. And I think that everything is real only because the devil has told me that everything is real. And really, I don't even have a brain. My hands are not my own hands. No. A tricky situation to get yourself into. Don't ponder too long on the question of existence, people. It can drive you quite strange. But Descartes, he came to a final conclusion that actually his brain must be real because God must be real and God must have put his brain inside his head. And God, being God, doesn't lie, so he wouldn't trick him. Therefore, his brain must be real, and therefore, because he thinks, he must exist. There you go. Just to give you a heads up, to really unpack the ideas of any of these philosophers would take me at least an hour each, but I'm giving you the overview here, people. It's just too fun not to. Now, Descartes was also incredibly good at mathematics and science, so quite an outstanding mind did Descartes have. Very, very interesting man. Didn't get up very early, though. No, he liked to stay in bed till noon. Didn't like to get dressed if he didn't have to either. Bit of a lazy bones in some ways, but there you go. I'm sure some of you can relate to Descartes on that front. Now, here also we have Voltaire. Now, if you remember a little bit earlier, we talked about Napoleon. We talked about the revolution, which killed the monarchy, took out the king and the queen, killed the rich people, killed the priests, and they became a democracy eventually after Napoleon. Now, a lot of this can be brought down to this man here, Voltaire. Not his real name. He called himself Voltaire, but he wasn't born that. That's why he's known by just one name. He has got wonderful hair, doesn't he? Yes. I'm not sure if it is his real hair or a wig, because of course this is well, just before the Georgian era, I think. So it could be a wig, but I like to think it's his own hair. And Voltaire came up with, well, the idea of democracy in a way. It had been done before for sure, but Voltaire, he took it that step further, and he talked about how everyone should have rights and that people should be able to vote and they should be able to come together and make their own decisions, and we shouldn't just do what the king or queen or God says. Voltaire, unlike Descartes, did not believe in God. He thought that God was a lie created by the kings and the bishops to trick him. Now, he wrote down his ideas about how democracy should work, and to be honest, the people of France weren't that interested. Not at first, but his books made their way across the ocean. And they landed on the shores of America. And the Americans there, they read the books of Voltaire, and they decided that, yes, it's a perfect idea. And so the Americans had a revolution. They threw off King George III. And they created well, the America that we know today, with presidents and stuff. The first one being George Washington, who would have read Voltaire's work. Now, after the Americans had got their freedom and made their own democracy, then the idea came back to France, and people started reading Voltaire a little bit more closely, and they too threw away the king and the queen, and they became a democracy too. And to show the link between Voltaire and democracy, France and America, the French created a mighty statue, the Statue of Freedom, or of course of Liberty, and they sent it over to America, and it stands there today out in the sea near New York. She stands there holding her light of truth. So yes, all thanks to Voltaire, really. There you go. Voltaire. Mia says these people look ugly. How offensive. You don't have to be pretty to be a philosopher. In fact, it's probably a benefit. I mean, if we look at all these guys, yeah, they're not particular stunners, are they? But that's because their brains are so huge. Yes, I don't know. I'm sure there were some gorgeous philosophers at some point, but maybe not these guys. All right, so that's a bit of a ramble through France today. Sorry for the little 10 minutes of philosophy there. I just couldn't resist. You can't look at France without looking at the greatest minds of our time, or at least the time before us. 19 stars. For, who is the 19 stars for? Potato salad? Is it for Descartes or Voltaire? Or, I don't know, philosophers in general? Who knows? Now, tomorrow we'll come back, and it will link quite nicely to Voltaire's idea, because we're actually going to look at one of the earliest republics, the Roman Republic. So, like I say, Voltaire didn't invent democracy, but he certainly played around with it. So we're going to look at the Romans and what their government and their society was like. And then on Friday, we're going to talk about Aeneas, the great Roman hero, sort of. I'll explain more at the time. Next week, we're going to a country beginning with G. I'll put up a vote for that one. I've got a few ideas, but I'll let you people decide on Facebook. All right, so thank you very much, guys, and I'll see you next time.